All right. Welcome to the Sumer Sports Show, Wednesday edition, week 11 edition. I'm Eric Eager. I'm joined by Thomas Dimitroff. Thomas, it's already been a tumultuous week in the NFL. It's been a tumultuous few days since we even did this podcast. Everybody remembers on Monday, we're talking about various league stuff. And we still hadn't had to watch Denver go to Buffalo. Denver goes to Buffalo. Denver wins as 7-point underdogs, 7.5-point underdogs, I think, at close. Buffalo, kind of a comedy of errors, a lot of turnovers. Josh Allen, a few interceptions, fumble by James Cook. And on Tuesday, they fired Ken Dorsey, the offensive coordinator, former quarterback for the Miami Hurricanes, if I'm not mistaken. And they replaced him with Joe Brady, who, Thomas, you're familiar with because Joe Brady at one point was the offensive coordinator for the Carolina Panthers during some trying times during the Matt Rule days. He becomes the interim guy, and Buffalo kind of moves into it. Thomas, what did you think about when you saw A, the game on Monday night, but also B, the move to move on from the offensive coordinator in Ken Dorsey?
Well, we can talk about the game in a minute here, but I want to go right to Ken Dorsey and a really tough decision for head coach and GM to make in season, right? It's never easy. And you know where my head went? Rarely is that completely premeditated, or motivated by just the head coach. Usually there is a little bit of a knock on the door from someone even higher, i.e. the owner, who's saying, like, what are we going to do here? What needs to be done? So there are discussions between a head coach and an owner about what are next moves here. And sometimes they're not comfortable, right? Many times, a head coach doesn't want to make that move in the middle of the season, right? But when there could be possible pressures from up top, along with the general manager, and there's a lot of discussion about it, you kind of have your back to the wall a little bit as a head coach. So they're not easy decisions to make. And it also sends the message to other people in the building, right? That the buck's stopping here. Like, this is BS. We're going to get this right. If not, there'll be other losses here, right? There'll be other losses, of course, before there'll ever be major changes in that organization.
But, it's so funny because on Monday we were talking about Belichick and how, where could he possibly go if it were to end in New England? And I thought, like, honestly, if you think about the sort of composition, like Buffalo would be a great job if it wasn't in the same division. We do know that Bill Parcells was traded within the division from New England to the Jets in 1997, but like that would be rare. It is stark though when you think about, McDermott had Leslie Frazier there, a former head coach, a very good culture guy, was a very effective play caller for the defense. That thing, Frazier kind of took the year off. It's still unclear as to sort of exactly the reason why that didn't work. And then, Dorsey now is let go. So both coordinators for a coach who has been phenomenal. When you think about point differential and you think about expected points added, all the measurements except for Super Bowls, the Buffalo Bills have been very good since 2020. And yet you start to see some of the leadership chipping away, not only the two coordinators, but Matt Milano, who is the middle linebacker, is out for the year. Edmonds left in free agency. So both the players up the middle of your defense and the linebacker spot are gone. And now, it's kind of Josh Allen, Sean McDermott, and that's who they're going to ride with. And Allen has been very mistake prone. McDermott has not necessarily, he's not necessarily, I think, proof of or he's not immune to some of these circumstances and these critics. It's going to be a very weird ride. Now, it's not unprecedented. I know you were in the league at this time. In fact, this was one of your better years in Atlanta. But in 2012, the Baltimore Ravens fired Cam Cameron in the middle of the season and replaced him with Jim Caldwell and won a Super Bowl. So that it's not actually this isn't an unprecedented move for a team that's in contention. And also it's not unprecedented for a team to go on a run after a move like this.
I always find it interesting. Not that I'm trying to dig up bones and rumors, right? But last year, we know what happened with Ken Dorsey, right? A little bit of the implosion, the fulmination, as we like to call it every once in a while. I mean, that was tough, right? Was there more to this, right? What? Probably not our business as much as it is internal. I do want to say a couple things. So, Sean McDermott, I just think like a coach like they have in Buffalo and a GM, that tandem, they get along really well, right? Big. They work well together. I think he's one of the better coaches in the league. He's top tier coach. When you said a little bit earlier, it would be a great place to go. I want to dig back into that for a minute. A, why do you think it would be a great place to go? And B, do you ever think in your mind that Mr. Pagula would say it's time to make a change? I'm just surprised that you alluded to that because be knocking on the door.
I agree with the McDermott love. I think that, mathematically, when you look at decision making, when you look at just like a top down approach to trying to model coaching, he's been phenomenal. But that doesn't necessarily mean, and again, you and I are pretty good about telling the truth on this show without talking shit about people. Like there's a real art to that. But I made this tweet yesterday. I said, this entire season, I've thought that the Bills were the 2006, the Dungy Colts, where they were close. And once people started to write them off, they won a Super Bowl. Are they not the Dungy Bucks instead? Where, Dungy takes over the Bucks in 96. They by 97, they put on the new uniforms. They make the playoffs. They're a contender. They're basically a contender. That's an arm's length away from the Super Bowl. 99, Bert Emanuel caught it, right? 2002 was the Rondé Barber pick six, but that was after losing to Philly the previous year. And so they're on the doorstep, and Tony Dungy's in the Hall of Fame. He's a fantastic coach, but John Gruden came in there and won a Super Bowl with his guys. And again, Belichick's much more accomplished than Gruden, right? We're not breaking ground there, but what is to say, you look at that formula and you're saying, it's not that McDermott's a bad coach. It's what if there just needs to be a new voice? And there's precedent for that in the NFL. Now, are they going through the steps? Yes. There's precedent for getting rid of an offensive coordinator, putting another guy in, and who has experience. Now, Jim Caldwell had much more experience than Joe Brady does, but it's still something where okay, let's try this out. If this doesn't work, okay, we maybe have to think about something more drastic. But I think that, the Belichick thing has precedent in history, Parcells and Gruden and, a lot of these really good coaches, Andy Reid, have been put in places in a second stanza of their career on ready-made teams that are championship caliber and have put them over the top.
So from a management standpoint, from an organizational standpoint, from a head coaching standpoint, when you make a move with the coordinator, again, difficult move to make. Sometimes it's someone that's your loyalist that you have to make a move on. Yes. Other times it's, a head coach and quite honestly, a general manager worrying about having a reputation for, having a management, an ownership situation where it's complicated to attract the best talent out there, right? I'm not saying that's Buffalo. I'm just saying hypothetically. As head coach and GM, we think about that when we start firing coaches in the middle of the season. Is it opening up Pandora's box? Is it the next step that's expected here, right? Okay, it's a coordinator. Next time things go awry, is Mr. Pagula hypothetically going to be knocking on someone's door, i.e. Sean's or Brandon's, and saying, hey, what's the next move here? We need another move. And then does it become a little bit of the next step and the next step? So it is dicey. You have to do it. I get it, but you just don't want it to be a situation. And as a head coach, for sure, you don't want to think anytime that an owner hypothetically is asking you to make a big time move like that, that you do it, right? You want to fight back, but then you know that it is train set. So you have to make these moves. And then you walk down the hall and you have coaches who are supposed to not be distracted. They're worrying, i.e. special teams coach, am I on my way out too? Something is
because we had 12 guys on the field on the last.
by the way, take an opportunity to listen to Mike Florio about that, like just going off on a team not being able to figure out 12. Now, there are many reasons for that, but my point is it starts this snowball effect of insecurities and question marks within a building. Sometimes it's good. Business people often are good with that, right? Sport can be a little bit funky because you need momentum, you need to stay high, you need to be morale building, and now you have people looking over their shoulders. So it's got its positives and it's got its concerns. I want to keep on that, Mark.
Yeah, like you're right. I think that the one thing that you have to ask, because like obviously you've been a part of this when you had to let go of Mike Smith and go with Dan Quinn. And what I thought was interesting about those Falcon days is you did so, and this is part of why I think you may have to consider acting on the McDermott thing, is you did so before anybody on your roster started being like, I'm one out of here. Like I need to get, like you think about Stephon Diggs's brother tweeting out like, we need to get this guy out of here. Josh Allen was nothing before, Stephon got here and all this kind of stuff. And like, not that, Diggs has done this a bunch of times, right? There's no, he did it in Minnesota a long time before he got traded. And then he's done it sometimes in Buffalo, but there is an element of, if you don't make a change up top sometimes, you're going to lose some of the 53. That is the reason that you're even have those expectations in the first place, right? And so, like, when you were in Atlanta, like, that 2014 team, like, you lost a big game at the end of the season, didn't get the division, but, like, you still had some good cornerstone players on your team when you made the switch, to Dan, right? And so you guys were in the Super Bowl 2 years later because you didn't have to completely rebuild. And I think that that's like what you run into if you don't, like, I think some people think like, well, you need continuity, but I think like if you don't make a change sometimes, it could affect the other 53 if there truly is that kind of like tension. Now, we don't know that tension exists in Buffalo, but you have Von Miller, you have Stephon Diggs, you have Josh Allen, you have guys who, you have guys who legitimately want to win Super Bowls. And I think that if you project to them that like, no, we're going to keep staying the course, they're going to be like, we've had this course for 4 years and we've never gotten past Kansas City, Cincinnati, any of those teams. So I think that that's like the one part of, and you go back all the way to that Tampa Bay team, like all those guys, like funny, like half of those guys were actually drafted by Sam Weish, not Dungy, but they were all players that were developed by Dungy that won a Super Bowl with Gruden. And again, it wasn't because Dungy was a bad coach. In fact, Dungy won his own Super Bowl. But it's like, but it was sort of like this sometimes the change was viewed as necessary.
So yeah, no, you have very valid points there. I keep going back to the times that we thought about it, times we didn't pull the trigger over years with both Mike Smith and Dan Quinn, sat down with Arthur and talked about some really tough decisions to make. Some we stayed with, others we moved forward and made tough decisions. And it's not like a player, like it's just when you fire a coach and he literally is walking out of your building for the last time, you haven't even repurposed him, right? Mm-hmm. Some people get repurposed. We had some of that going on where we put another guy, stopped him from being a coordinator. He ended up taking over the defensive backs, or a D coordinator who ended up kind of taking over D-line and linebackers. And then Dan Quinn down the stretch in the Super Bowl was calling our defense, right?
No one knew that publicly, right? That was not a public, like, that's been only revealed recently.
It was a big deal, sure. So, I mean, all I'm saying is when you make that move, now there's just, again, I don't want to, how do I put this? It's not like a player, when you make a move on a player, you move on, you're like, well, you make a move on. He's not doing a job anymore, move on. So I just continue to want to come back to find out what precipitated this truly. Are there, in your mind, from an analytical standpoint, is there A, B, and C and X, Y, and C, or are there A, B, and C, X, Y, and C? And in my mind, I go to, okay, I want to know, was he not calling? How was he leading? How was he communicating? How was he, in the meeting rooms? How was he interacting with the other coaches? Was it becoming contentious in the building because everyone had high expectations? There's normally a lot more of that versus, I don't really like the way he's calling the game and I'm going to fire him.
Yeah.
That's a big deal.
Yeah, I think it's interesting. I have to look at the numbers, but there are some people that I follow and people in the chat who are quite good at the handicapping of the NFL. And a lot of people were sort of pointing to this idea that, McDermott wasn't a great fit in the sense that like he wants more of a ground and pound, wants more of a get back to basics offense. And, not to cast a value statement on that, because I have my beliefs on it, but like you do see that sometimes Buffalo, when you watch the games, there are drives where you look at the play-by-play and it's like run to James Cook for 6 yards, run to James Cook for 10 yards, run to James, and then they just like get bored. And like this is like the big thing with modern defenses, Thomas. It's like the modern defense will like take some of these superstar quarterbacks and like basically make the optimal play running the ball. And then these superstar quarterbacks get like jittery and throw an interception because they're trying to get down the field too much. And so maybe I have a hard time looking at an offense that's like really good in expected points added, that's moving the football really well, that scored a lot of points mostly over the last like 3 or 4 years, last 2 years even, and being like, he's the problem. I think it's probably either cultural or something like, look, we got to make a change, and either it's you or it's somebody on your staff, which is unfortunate, right? Like that could be the case. And, you can't, the old adage is you can't fire all the players. And, I think that the issue is I think most of the adults in Buffalo know it's not right. So I don't necessarily know if you needed to fire somebody to send a message. Like they know that 5-5 is not acceptable, but at the same time, maybe ownership doesn't agree. Maybe they're like, look, you gotta serve somebody up right now because it's not working. And it's been going this way for a long time. I don't know. Like these are just guesses by me.
Look, the other thing I'd say, and they're great. They're all really good points. I mean, I don't know. Like the idea of moving on from someone as a coordinator, to your point, you have to serve someone up. I'm more apt in my first 3, 4, or 5 years in the NFL. I was all about like, hey, no one needs to be outed but the head coach and the GM. And as I've gone on and have gotten older and more mature in this business, there's a lot of money that goes into these coordinators, right? I mean, the numbers are big, and the numbers are big on the position coaches. There are position coaches out there making $2 million, O-line coaches and D-line coaches. Of course, there's a sliding scale there. So they're so much more accountable than they ever were. And a coordinator, an offensive coordinator, I don't know, what Dorsey was making, but suffice it to say that coordinators could be making between, I don't know, $2 million and $4 million, or even $5 maybe, because I know what some of the big D coordinators are making as well. So all of a sudden, is that person supposed to be able to be tucked away and we got to protect him? Like, let's go back here a minute. We were talking yesterday, coming back from Morehouse. By the way, we did a great meeting with some Morehouse kids last night. And my guy here, Eric, after I brought up a really cool video on halftime with Bobby Knight, he brings up the former head coach of the Minnesota Vikings. And he was, I'll let you talk about it. He was defending the offensive coordinator, Schnelker, right? Is that his name?
Yeah, Bob Schnelker. So yeah, if you're a football fan, it behooves you to watch this clip because it's one of the best. It's one of the best post-game coaching rants that you'll ever see. But the backdrop of this, and Tom, like the Vikings won it. This was the year the Vikings traded for Herschel Walker. They were a Super Bowl favorite, and they were struggling on offense after trading for Walker. So there's clearly a lot of frustration. In a game against the Los Angeles Rams, they won 23-21 in a game in overtime where they blocked a punt and got a safety. They scored their 21 points through 7 field goals, not 3 touchdowns. So you can imagine the crowd was pissed every time they go 70 yards and they'd have to kick a field goal. The other funny story is their kicker was one of those guys that didn't wear a shoe. So this barefooted, like little soccer player is going out and kicking 7 field goals. So the crowd's like pissed because they traded all this money, all this stuff for Herschel Walker. It's not producing. And so they're all going after Bob Schnelker. And what's really funny is, among a lot of other things in that, is he just goes on this swearing tirade about how the fans are stupid and how you guys are dumb for criticizing him. And I think the funniest part, and it's epic. Like, don't watch it if you have young kids because there's a lot of swearing and stuff. But the I think the funniest part about this is Bob Schnelker didn't last that much longer in Minnesota after that rant. So like Jerry Burns stands up for him. That team finishes 10-6. You can ask how I know all this nonsense, but like they finish 10-6. They lose in the first round of the playoffs. And then they bring in Tom Moore, the one that took Peyton Manning. So they were very clearly like they brought in Tom Moore and Mark Trestman, two future like very good offensive coordinators in the NFL, and they replaced Snelker. Like it's funny, but the coach goes to bat and swears up a storm with all these reporters, and then he turns around and makes the move, right? Like not all that much deeper into the whole thing, and it just shows you exactly what we're talking about, Thomas.
Well, that's where I was going with it, and you did a good job explaining it. I wish that we could pull it up on here, even for a couple, just his personality. And the reason I'll post it
on Twitter with the show notes, so that people who go to us on Twitter can also see the hilariousness of Bob Schnelker.
My point is
Jerry Burns.
Jerry Burns. My point on that is old school was defending like crazy. Remember, Bob Schnelker was probably making $75,000 a year, not $2, $3, $4, $5 million a year.
Yep.
Today's world, you're hung out there. I mean, a GM back in the day used to be tucked behind the head coach and would survive 3, 4, 5 head coaches. In today's world, our general managers out there making $4, $5, $6 million a year, which is very different. So you better damn well believe that those owners are saying, no, man, if you can't get it done, your ass is going to be out there in front of everyone. And if we fire you, we fire you. Good luck on your neck. They're not feeling bad about it anymore.
But it's also, and we talked about this on a previous pod. It was a little bit controversial, but I'm going to bring it up a little bit. The other part is the business of the NFL is different, right? When you think about like who you came up with, the Piolis and the Savages and the Schwartzes, and then like you kind of move through, and you guys are all independent of what's happened in your careers. You guys are all still like pretty close. You guys can all kind of like, ask people for favors, right? Like that, and that's awesome. And that's how, I'm not trying to sound like a boomer, but that's like how it used to be, right? People protected themselves. Jerry Burns was the offensive coordinator for Bud Grant for like 25 years, right? And then Bob Schnelker was, and they're all like in this fraternity type of thing. But now you have some of these kind of like, and I mean, like they're more like arranged marriages type of thing. Joe Brady was the best thing since sliced bread when he was at LSU, when Joe Burrow, Justin Jefferson, Jamar Chase, Clyde Edwards-Helaire, they're setting records, right? He goes to Carolina. He's not a Matt Rule guy, right? He was never but he goes there because there's input, right? And he might not have gotten to choose his entire staff. And so when things went pear-shaped with Sam Darnold a year and a half later, they fire Joe Brady, right? And to your point, it's because he's not one of their, like, there's also an element of like the community that's not necessarily there anymore, right? I mean, that I think is apparent.
That's exactly right. That was my point in the end. Look, we're just a different generation now, so much more involved in this. So when someone is outed, they're outed. That's why I was alluding to the fact that a special teams coach back in the day was rarely called out. It might have been called out by the media, but team wouldn't. Head coach would defend them till the end. I don't think that's happening anymore today. It's a different world. I'm not saying it's right. I don't know if it's wrong. I am saying the money involved in all of this dictates the direction that we're going as we make big time moves like this during the middle of the season.
Before we move on, this is a really good question, and this is actually from LinkedIn. You can watch this on LinkedIn. Dylan Kramer, with EPA already so high in Buffalo, what do you expect to change in the offense with Brady? I don't actually think the Bills will be any more efficient on offense. They've been plenty efficient. In fact, if you had to guess, I would say that they would probably regress. The other part that's tricky is a lot of people will say, well, you're going to get a new coach boom. This team has had a top 5 easiest schedule in the NFL so far. They have the hardest schedule moving forward. So I don't necessarily know if it gets any easier for them. But what it does do is it puts a huge spotlight on Josh Allen because, Josh Allen's been the one person so far that's kind of avoided obviously you're not going to bench a quarterback making a $250 million, but like there's elements of like at some point everybody's losing their job except for you. Like there's going to be some pressure, and I think Allen will either live up to sort of his billing as one of the top 2 or 3 quarterbacks in the league, or we're going to see Buffalo at home in the playoffs for the first time since 2018, which is a long time ago. Speaking of a team that's probably going to be home for the playoffs, now they were last year, but they've been perennially a playoff team, and it's gone a little bit weird for them this year. Are the Green Bay Packers, Thomas? This was a team that I think a lot of people, including myself, I'll stand here, were more bullish on going into the season than others, and it just has not worked out for them. If you look, offensively for Green Bay, you're talking about a middle of the pack team, which is actually better than I would have expected. Defensively, you're talking about a team that's sort of that's again kind of middle of the pack. But right now, that's turned into a 3-6 mark. And when you look at the percentages here, you have to go all the way down to 16 to look at their power rating and a 7 win projection so far. And this is for a team, Thomas, that when you look at strength of schedule, the first 10 weeks of the season, the Packers have had the 5th easiest schedule so far and have only really managed to win 3 games. It's not going to get all that much harder for them. They still have the 11th easiest schedule down the stretch. But this is a team that I think, Thomas, has been a little bit disappointing relative to market and as well as just kind of narrative expectations.
Yeah, I mean, as I was watching it, I was concerned, of course, because I've said from the very beginning on the quarterback side, I still, though there are a lot of benefits to their quarterback, I do believe that he has some natural ability, of course, right? Coming out, the concern for him was, where was he as a true leader, right? We talked about that. And that's something that sometimes you can evolve into. Other times, if you're just naturally not that type of guy that's just going to take it and lead the troops, you can still win in this league. But a team, the head coach, the GM has to be very creative with how they're putting it all together, who they're putting around those players, that quarterback in potentially this situation, and how they're all thriving and evolving, right? I said this before as well. I mean, Brian Gutekunst has been there for how many years? 5 or 6 years now, I think.
Yeah. Yep. Right around that.
I think Matt LaFleur, of course, has an amazing record up to this point. They're now sans Aaron Rodgers, right? Things start looking very different now, which is a big deal. Just like Bill got ostracized or scrutinized, for, how things were going to go. And everyone's saying, okay, let's see how these guys do in this world when they lose Tom Brady, right? So people were doing their judgment. Everyone, right, wrong, or not right or wrong, people are looking at what's going on in Green Bay and how they're building and what they did in the big moves, right? This isn't just about the 4th, 5th, or 6th rounder that you hit on. I am steadfast in this league. Owners, general managers, as you're being judged, it is about the big moves you make across your career. I'm talking about quarterback moves. I'm talking about trades. I'm talking about firings. I'm talking about hirings. I'm talking about, I'm just talking about legitimate creativity to how you're building your team. That is a big, big deal, right? So right now, Green Bay is in a spot where everyone's watching closely, right? They have a community-owned organization, right? We know that. Mark Murphy is
a very rabid fan base, although their stadium was pretty empty the other day. But yeah.
Yeah. And we have Mark Murphy, who's the guy who's ultimately going to make decisions on anything that's changing. I am not saying in any way there should be a change there. I'm just saying now the clock really starts ticking for Matt. And it has been ticking all along for Brian Gutekunst for other reasons, right? That's just the way it is. So watch closely as this starts to unveil in my mind. If they continue to lose, it gets, my line, it gets a lot more dusty. And what do they do to clean it up? And do you happen to have their draft picks in front of you? Because
you and I are on such the same wavelength. I was literally pulling it up on Pro Football Reference. So let's go here. This is by the way, Pro Football Reference, great resource. When you look at the draft picks for the Packers, I was just going to bring this up, Thomas, because I think I know kind of where you're going, and this website's kind of crazy with ads and stuff. But I look at this and I look at their top picks. Lucas Van Ness is kind of a complimentary player. Luke Musgrave, Jaden Reed are both complimentary players. Quay Walker, Devontae Wyatt. Now, they wanted to hit on Christian Watson. But again, you're talking about a guy from a Division 1AA, FCS school. There are 3 complimentary players. Complimentary players in 2021, a DB and a center. You finally get down to Jordan Love, but even in the Jordan Love year, backup running back, backup tight end, like linemen who I think that they want to be starters but aren't necessarily like blue chip type players. And even going back to like 2019 with Rashawn Gary. Rashawn Gary was drafted. Now, he's a wonderful player now, but he was drafted to be a backup. When I look at these drafts, I'm just not seeing I'm not seeing the Julio Joneses. I'm not seeing like the big swings on true difference makers. And I think that like people look at those drafts, Thomas, and they say, okay, these are great foundation building drafts. But that only is true when you have the stud quarterback and the stud wide receiver in Devontae Adams and the stud corner like Jared Alexander. Like once you have those pillars, like these drafts make sense. But once you take away the true like difference making pillar type player, then all these players are kind of like playing out of position as trying to be superstars on this team.
Yeah, you used a word there that I don't necessarily agree with. No offense, Brian Gutekunst, because I've said this before. Brian knows how to evaluate. I mean, he's been in the draft rooms, scouting rooms for years and years. And I do believe that there's another part to being a GM, right? It's not just evaluating players. It's how you maneuver with your head coach, how you're maneuvering with the personalities, as you bring them in. I don't think these are great developing drafts. I think they're sound drafts with a mode and a means that Brian took over from, Ted Thompson, who ran the organization in a certain way. And I'm sure there are certain things that he pulled with him. Other things, of course, he didn't. That's up to Brian in that way, just like Matt LaFleur, he's got to coach the players in a certain way as well. It's just, I guess my thought on it, you're going to run as your quarterback runs. And, this is the first year that he's got, he's at the helm, right? So what does Mark Murphy and co do when they start thinking about moves and decisions, i.e. coordinators? Let's just stay there. Let's not even go to head coaches and general managers. What are they going to do after this season? Where's Matt LaFleur on this? And where does he make
that's the thing. I think LaFleur continues. Like again, it's all these things
I'm sorry. Where I don't want to make sure. Then I'll give it over to you. Where is Matt LaFleur going with his group? Right, that group is a tight knit group. Right, I know that coaching group. They had a lot of good friends in their groups. They trusted each other. Now it comes to potentially a hard decision for him if Mark and again, board says like you got to make a move or we got other things to do. Right. Once again, complicated.
Yeah, I'm looking a little bit at their sort of coaching staff, and it's interesting because again, like you said it perfectly. You go as your quarterback goes in the case that in how they're acting, right? So right now they have LaFleur, Rich Bisaccia as the special teams coordinator, assistant head coach. I think a little bit of his deal was how well he did as the interim coach. They hired him to replace because their special teams were so bad in the playoffs for a few years. But I don't necessarily know if that's improved. I think Bisaccia is more of like a leader than he is maybe a tactician special teams wise. But you look at like offensive coordinator, you look, Adam Stanovich. Okay, well, Getsy was the quarterback coach. He went to be the offensive coordinator for the Bears. Hackett was the offensive coordinator. Then he goes to Denver and New York. Like there's been turnover there. Tom Clements was a offensive coordinator, quarterbacks coach for Mike McCarthy. Now he's there. And again, like he wasn't the greatest. He was a good supporting guy for McCarthy, but there was a year where they tried to let him call plays. And then halfway through the year, McCarthy had to take over play calling because he wasn't suited for that. And then you look at the defensive side, and then that is where you have seen the loyalty, which with Barry being there the whole time. But I think unfortunately it's mostly been because that defense has sort of underachieved relative expectations. And so there's not been the head coaching like interest for Joe Barry, even though that defense has kind of been vanilla and run the same thing. So when I look at that staff, I'm thinking LaFleur had some pretty good guys next to him, helping him out, especially on offense. Those guys are gone. And then in addition to that, you lose the quarterback, who is kind of the drive. He's the whole car, right? And so when that happens, it's just going to be different. Like the team like the 49ers, when you go top 5 pick with Bosa, top guy like Debo, top guy like Ayuk, and you just continue to throw hugely talented players at premium positions on your roster, then maybe Brock Purdy's good enough. And maybe it'll all work. And maybe that's what they were thinking about with Love. But the missing ingredient for the Packers, unfortunately, was the high-end, the high-endness of anything else on their roster besides Rodgers, especially after they traded Adams to the Raiders. It was just, to me, it's like, I don't think anything that the Packers have right now is objectionable. It's just that the sum of it is not enough right now.
And then let's circle back around. When we start defending Brian and Matt, as GM and head coach, they were in a sticky situation. They rode the tail for sure in the right way. We all would have done that. That's not derogatory. A quarterback who is one of the best that we've seen play around, right? He's got unbelievable talent, and he's complicated. We've talked about that. I oftentimes during all of that, I would put myself in Brian's shoes as a general manager of a team like that, and I'm thinking, wow, when you're dealing with someone with that strong of a personality, of course, Matt Ryan had a strong personality, but a very different personality, right? You get people in the building, and there's a lot of loyalty going on in the building, and then you, as a general manager, have to be very cognizant, and you have to have people with a keen eye in that building, letting as a general manager, how is it really unfolding and folding? Like what's going on in the locker room? Where are the eyes being rolled? Where are the question marks? And then does that play into, how much of a true leader is Jordan Love? And do we have what we need after Aaron Rodgers leaves? Do we have any leadership? I mean, not any, that's ridiculous. Do we have 5? Is it adequate? Is it 4?
I mean, Jordan Love is the oldest position player that the Packers have, other than I think Aaron Jones. So and that guy started, he's just now starting his first games. This is, there are aspects of that. Like somebody, Kurt Benkert, who played quarterback for Green Bay for us and also played in Atlanta for a little bit. He was saying everything that Jordan Love learned from Aaron Rodgers was happening when Devontae Adams was the security blanket. And now you get in there and you're back there and everybody's less experienced than you are even. And it is tough. And I think, and again, I don't necessarily think that any one move has led the Packers to this other than Rodgers, but Rodgers tipped their hand. He wasn't playing well. That's why they drafted Jordan Love. Then he started playing like an MVP, and then you're kind of stuck, right? This isn't something where I'm going to give them a ton of criticism because I think they acted rationally at every point in time. Things just changed enough where it gave them a tough deck of cards to deal with. But it is right now, it just feels like they're kind of stuck. They're stuck until, and somebody asked, the question about, will be interesting to see Green Bay's draft process now with a top 7 pick. Yeah, they haven't had a top 10 pick since I think AJ Hawk. And that's way back in the day. And so, it's gonna really be interesting to see how they rebound from this. We do have to go soon. We were going to talk about Will Levis. We'll talk about him next Wednesday. Hopefully, now that he gets a little game. He was playing good. Then he played bad on Sunday. Hopefully, we see a little bit more of the roller coaster on the in coming weeks here for Levis. But this has been a good show. I think it's always fun to get your opinion on things like what happened in Buffalo, because I think a lot of people really want to know, what does this mean? Where are they going to go from here? Does it, and I think a lot of people in Buffalo are left with more questions than answers after this. So a very interesting topic. Thomas, do you have anything to add before we take off and call it a day?
No, I want to know where you are finishing up. Last thing on Green Bay, where do you think Jordan Love is? I asked you the other day, point blank, on a quarterback, and do you think he's a top 20 quarterback?
I think Jordan Love's a top 20 quarterback. I would not give him. I would not give him a second contract after this, though. I just think it's way too hard to build a roster around a midline quarterback who's making Daniel Jones kind of money.
Well, there you go.
You know, like I just where, you know, if he fails, right, like Daniel Jones has so far, you're stuck, right? It's just really hard. And so, like, I think you're just better off. Like Michael said, you might have a top 7 pick. You can go in and just, you know, keep taking shots at the position. I know Green Bay fans hate that because their whole thing for the last 30 years has been get young guys in the building, and the Aaron Brookses and the Matt Hasselbecks and the Ty Detmers and all that, like Aaron Rodgers, they all backup quarterbacks all ended up being useful. And so their prior on how well Jordan Love will be is a little different, but it's just a bad gamble to take a kind of midliner quarterback, to use your phrase, and back up the truck and pay him that much money.
Good response. Thank you. I like it.
Awesome. Well, now that I passed that test, we'll pass on to the next test of the day, which will be more meetings, which are always fun. It's been a great day. It's always fun to talk football with you, Thomas. It's always fun to hear you guys' reactions in the chat. By the way, who said this? Very difficult says, hopefully not banned from this chat. We will not ban people from the chat unless you are like a porn bot or something. We will not ban you from the chat. So for Thomas Dimitroff, for Eric Eager, this has been the Sumer Sports Show.